Let's get started this morning. Thank you all for joining in. We've done this every year except last year. We have a Columbus Day event where we invite the public in. And the first thing we do is we go through Civics 101. We talk about how a bill becomes law in the state of Kansas. So that's how we'll start today. And that will be followed by, I'm going to give an update on what the Water Committee is doing. And then third, people have asked me about the Constitution, and you can go read the Constitution, do all that on your own, but I've been alarmed by the misuse of terms that are in the Constitution and as well as our state constitution. So I'll go through some of those terms that I've done some research on. So with that, let's get started. I was asked to give a talk in Emporia on the Constitution. Well, all 4 representatives and a senator in that area were asked to give a talk. Well, I knew they were going to cover the big topics in constitutions. So I chose a different tack. There are words that are being used by folks that I'm a little concerned about. And quite frankly, I wasn't sure of their meaning. So I did my own research. And here's a few of the examples. Freedom versus liberty. What's the difference? And you see there, freedom is predominantly an internal construct. And Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor, wrote a book. And within that book, he said, everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way in how he approaches circumstances. And that to me is a really good definition of freedom. You have to take ownership of what goes on between your ears. That's your freedom. And liberty is predominantly an external construct. It's the state of being free within a society from oppressive restrictions imposed by authority or one's way of life, behavior, or political views. Those are liberties that you find within your society. Now, this is getting into the weeds a little bit, but I found it kind of fascinating. Our founding fathers, they went one step further, noted the distinction between negative and positive liberties. And then they codified those differences in the U.S. Constitution, the Bill of Rights. Positive liberties, and this is kind of backwards thinking, but bear with me. Positive liberties require others to provide you with either a good or a service. This includes taking one from someone else to provide the good or service to another. Negative liberties require that others abstain from interfering with your actions. The Bill of Rights is a document of negative liberties. These are the liberties that shall not be hampered in any way. Then we go on to another one that's been bugging me for quite a while, but I finally took the time to do the research. Differences between a right and a privilege. Rights are not conferred by anyone, and they cannot be taken away or altered by anyone. They are inherent. They are natural or God-given. The Constitution does not exist to give us rights, but to protect the rights we are born with. That's how it was designed. Privileges, on the other hand, do not belong to all. They are given to some and withheld from others. They are unequal by nature. It's just the way it is. Often, a privilege involves taking something from one group and giving it to another. Prime examples of this: taxes are collected to support welfare, education, medical care, you name it, all these things, free education. Now, because it's a privilege, it can be altered. changed, or even withheld. A driver's license is a privilege. You can think of all kinds of things that are privileges. We're hearing the words that these things now have been changed to a right. But that is not what the founders intended. And I'm going to stick with the meanings as they should be used. Rights exist outside government, and privileges exist within government. Just to clarify a little more, but rights cannot exist without government. There are no rights in an anarchy. And you've seen examples of that in some of these cities where they had a total breakdown in society, anarchy, if you will. The privilege of having an ambulance come to you was not allowed in those areas. They were blocked from coming in. There was no law. There was no government. It was a mess. So we do have to have government. And our government was set up to protect both our rights, and that was the primary design. And those that weren't given to the federal government belonged to the state. And we need to remember that. But one thing, as I read through all of this research, one thing that kept coming up over and over again, one very important principle overlooked is that in our form of government, personal responsibility is key. If you are not personally involved, because our government is built from the individual up, not the top down. And if the individuals no longer care or are involved in their government, then we will have a problem. It's a personal responsibility. That's part of our government, the way it was designed. Now, it seems silly, but the words shall, will, may, and must are bandied around about. In fact, we argued for 2 hours one night on the floor in the House whether the word in the bill should be shall or may. At that time, I believed shall meant you will. But in my research, I found that shall is confusing because in our vernacular today, it can mean may, will, or must. Must is a word of obligation, and must not is also a word of obligation. So they are clear. The U.S. Supreme Court, well, let's go back. Brian Garner, the editor of Black's Law Dictionary, this is a dictionary that attorneys use. Like in my practice, I had a medical dictionary. They have a law dictionary. The editor said shall is the most litigated word in the English language. So there's a red flag right there. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the word shall, when it appears in statutes, it means may. So we have problems in our statutes and we have problems in our regulations because these words appear quite often. The word shall appears in the Bill of Rights and their intent is clear. It means must. For the meaning of the words in those days. Now let's go to the Kansas Constitution. There's Senate Bill 95 passed in 2015 out of the legislature and signed into law. And immediately litigation began the next year. This is the abortion law that we passed. Here I read through the opinion piece, the opinion that the Supreme Court judges wrote. And here's some of the things they cited within that opinion. They said the Bill of Rights and the Kansas Constitution is stronger even than the U.S. 14th Amendment. And that's the due process clause in the Constitution. That the Bill of Rights give personal autonomy. And because the Kansas Bill of Rights appear first in the state constitution, they are the most important part of the Constitution. And you can imagine my confusion when I read their opinion. But So I said, I want to find out if those words appear in our Constitution. So I did a word search in the Kansas Constitution. The words abortion and personal autonomy do not appear in our state constitution. So I just said, well, let's look into this a little more. What does personal autonomy mean? It's a concept of self-government, essentially the notion that humans are, or most properly ought to be, self-governed or self-directed in terms of their choices, their actions, and the direction of their lives. Distinguish this from freedom. One is free if there are no external constraints on one's actions. There are conditions to achieve true autonomy. According to, I got this information from a law review article. They're psychological, and an individual actively assess their environment and the choices available and do so in a rational and non-self-deceptive manner. So don't deceive yourself. Get all the facts on the table. And the other condition is social. And there are two of those. The autonomous individual must have a legitimate range of alternative actions from which to choose. The individual's choices must not be overly restricted by others. And within that law review article I mentioned, this came from the Marshall Law Review article, if an individual's choices are determined purely by their economics or bodily needs, in other words, they are not autonomous. For those reasons, I voted for the constitutional amendment will appear next November on the ballot and allow the people to decide if we want to put in our Constitution clear words that state that abortion is not a right in our state. So that you'll hear more about as time goes on before the election. And that, folks, ends the information from your guest speaker. And the guest speaker now asks if there are any more questions.
Ron Harvey, I just want to thank you for the time you've taken. We really appreciate the opportunity to hear this.
Thank you, Vi. I appreciate that. It's a labor of love. These questions bug me, so I have to do the research and find out for myself. And that's what you do up here. You try to represent people the best you can and help everyone you can. And last year, that's been a big one with the labor issues, but we do what we can. Any other questions before we sign off? Thank you all for attending. I appreciate it. Have a great day and a great week. We finally got some rain.
Okay, thanks, Ron.
Bye.